Okay, so the theme of today's training is protecting your buyers and sellers through additional contract terms. And in the last year and a half that we've kind of seen a shift in the market, there has been more and more instances where issues are coming up with our purchase agreements that there isn't a term for in the contract. And when you have buyers who are uncertain or sellers who are uncertain of what's happening, it it seems like, I don't know what everyone else is experiencing, but I get the calls sometimes. I know our sales coordinators get the calls where people are looking for reasons to cancel a purchase agreement or looking for reasons to do as little as possible on the closing side if they're sellers, expecting that their agent will just pick up the slack and deal with things, or that a buyer won't necessarily cause an issue with the situation. And that is not the case. What we see happening more often than not is closings get delayed, closings getting canceled in a way that hurts the seller, um, or personal property being left behind, dirty homes, terms of inspection that are not clearly defined that result in last minute concessions and a lot of stress at the closing table. So how do we avoid some of these situations? And Ian and I were talking last week on Friday, I think it was, about a recent issue he had with personal property being left behind. And Sarah and I were talking, Sarah Church and I, she had messaged me last week about, a house that had all sorts of holes left in it from pictures and what constitutes, the condition the property should be left in. There's no verbiage really in our purchase agreements that cover those things. Carter had an issue this spring or this summer with the cancellation where buyers just canceled. They got cold feet after something, and they went as far as getting their lender to issue a denial of financing letter to get their earnest money back. Okay, so there's a lot of fear situations happening out there. We had an issue with an agent last month where earnest money was never submitted on a cash offer, and neither was proof of funds. And the terms for earnest money in our existing purchase agreement do not state that a purchase agreement can be canceled if earnest money is not submitted. So do you have a question?
Cancellation and seller for retaining the first money and what kind of complications that have. I never, since 2020, I never seen one of those up until this time. All of a sudden, there was three listings that had a hole in it.
Sure. So Carter's asking about commonality of an earnest money receipt. He's seeing those submitted with offers on his listings. In my experience, it's most common to do an earnest money receipt if the buyer is submitting their earnest money via check. If it's typically trust funds, usually that's just initiated through the system. And then the earnest money receipt that comes out of that is the settlement statement, which we then turn in. So I don't know about maybe Nicole in your experience as well, if you see any difference. It's just, yeah, it's the
Already given them
correct.
the check
Is there a check number on the bottom of that?
number on the
Okay, so look for the check number. Correct. So just to recap what was being talked about, if you can't hear, if an earnest money receipt is submitted with an offer, that's because either a check has been given to the agent or the agent has physically has their eyes on the earnest money. It's either been submitted immediately or that they are accepting a check on behalf of the buyer. So it's
one ever in like
it might be, yeah. Okay. Sure. So there's no issue with that. An earnest money receipt or proof of earnest money is required by our compliance department for all of your sales. So one way or another, you are submitting an earnest money receipt, whether it's a copy of the check that you picked up on behalf of your client and you're scanning that check and saving that, and that's what gets uploaded into SkySlope, that constitutes an earnest money receipt. If it's the no, no, that's why accounting is one of your fiduciary duties, right? It says that you're going to have an accurate accounting for any property or funds that are put into your possession for the purpose of the house. Earnest money is one of those things. So it's very common, and it especially was when I got licensed, people were still submitting their earnest money via check most of the time. And so commonplace practice, you need to have a receipt, whether it's an actual earnest money receipt, which you don't have to use that form. Again, you could just have a scanned copy of the check or a picture of the check turned in. I always black out my client's account number if I'm doing that. Otherwise, trust funds, once that is settled, our transaction coordinators always ask for a copy of that settlement statement because that serves as the earnest money receipt. And again, it's for compliance purposes.
Do you think people are doing that at a time just as like an extra layer of
I've got earnest money, here you go.
Right.
Yep.
I think that's why they're doing it.
Nervous thing.
No, I think that's why they're doing it is just to show you I can prove to you he's gonna have earnest money.
Right, but I think it's
Winning your offer, it's not the winning offer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now that even if it's not winning off, with the receipt on there.
Yep. That's someone I think more than anything they're trying to convey. We're serious about this. I've already got earnest money in hand.
You take that,
I would take it as a positive.
card, just so you know, just that earnest money receipt doesn't change the fact that it's still held in the listing brokerage's
Right.
trust account. So
There's
even
no
if they've submitted it to their listing agent, they're just showing that they're good for it.
Right.
Doesn't change that it's going to be held by us if you're on the list side.
term is exactly the same. So even if the buyer's agent has the check, they still have to submit it to EXP. So get it to you so it can get processed. That kind of leads in, I guess, to a couple of the things I wanted to talk about with earnest money. So the term in our purchase agreement is pretty vague. Yes, we have under mortgage financing contingency, whether or not earnest money would be refunded to a buyer, retained by a seller, or if it's related to having a written statement. But there are additional options that for verbiage that you can put or terms you can add to your purchase agreement that would protect your seller. One example would be, and Chelsea, this is a perfect example of the issue you had come up with your sister's condo sale. Writing into your purchase agreement that upon inspection, removal of inspection contingency, earnest money is forfeited. Meaning once we go into a pending state, you know, if you're confident in your financing, that earnest money is forfeited. You can actually add that as a term to your purchase agreement on line 460 in the other tab and make it just a part of the initial terms of accepting an offer. Another thing to do would be, and it was kind of a fiasco how this came about, but that first example I was giving of an agent who accepted an offer on her listing and the earnest money was never submitted. And it was a cash offer, proof of funds weren't submitted either. And the way that our purchase agreements are written, it says if any of the terms of the PA are not fulfilled, the purchase agreement can be canceled. What isn't talked about is that there's a very long process in that, one involving declaratory cancellation, another involving right to cure, where any person in a purchase agreement has 15 days to remedy the term that they have not fulfilled without being forced into cancellation. And then the other is statutory cancellation, which occurs once a closing date is missed and buyer or seller is refusing to sign the cancellation. So if you're looking for additional protection for your sellers and you want the right to cancel a purchase agreement without having to go through that whole process, ideally not having to go through that whole process, you can include a term in your purchase agreement which states, generic verbiage here, earnest money shall be submitted within 3 days of final acceptance date and proof of submission given to listing agent. If the earnest money is not submitted, this purchase agreement is canceled. Buyer and seller agree to sign a cancellation of purchase agreement. And just put that term in there. That in itself will supersede declaratory cancellation. It takes away their right for 15 days to cure. You don't have to wait for them to figure out what's going on. You don't have to draw out a potential like bad purchase agreement where they're not going to fulfill the terms. It's very cut and dry, but that verbiage does not exist in our existing purchase agreements. So it is a term you'd have to add.
So you would add this as the listing agent, you're saying you would protect your sellers. So you receive an offer, first term's already filled out. Would you add that as an amendment? You're not filling out the purchase agreement, so where would that go? I don't know.
Counter offer, yep, in the other tab, that's what I would do.
Okay.
And you could do a combination of verbiage in there. So the first part I mentioned about if it's not submitted within 3 days, you could add that. And if the offer is contingent to inspection, you could also add that it's non-refundable once inspection contingency is cleared. So just so you know, there's more options than just someone turning earnest money in, because I don't know about you, but I have had several cancellations in the last couple of years where my clients should not have gotten their earnest money back, and they found a way to do it, right? And when you're representing the seller, even if you're representing the buyer as an agent, you know it's wrong. Ethically, it bothers me, right? And so I just think like, let's be proactive in protecting our clients. We can set the tone for this up front when we are doing our listing appointments or when we receive an offer. Know that that's an option for you, and in terms that you can add to the purchase agreement. So what I want as kind of a takeaway today is we are not limited to just the terms available to us in our contracts or in our come on in, Chris, in our contracts or in the subsequent documentation. So like the verbiage in the addendums and the amendments, yes, that's there. They quote oftentimes the statutes related to real estate, but there is nothing that says we can't create an additional term and put it into the PA. That's what our clauses are for. That's what the other tabs are for. Line 460 in our PA, blank addendum, adding it that way. You could certainly do that as well. Any questions on that one? Okay. The next point I wanted to talk about was personal property removal. I don't know, is anyone else here having an issue with that? Where they've seen an uptick? Okay. Sure. Yep. So putting it into the purchase agreement is different than putting it into the personal property addendum. So our personal property agreement, two different things. So I would encourage caution on that. But there's 2 points related to personal property we wanted to talk about. Do you want to take over one of these and introduce it first with your?
Yes,
okay.
This happened to me last Friday. To make a longer story short, my buyers had paid them for it's not a fixture, but there were some shelves that were fixtures. And so, including TV mounts, some of the shelves, like I mentioned, and we had referenced it, not in the purchase agreement or the personal property agreement, but when we sent that offer over, they had sent us over a list of furniture saying, hey, we'll sell these items separately. And then I pointed out to the listing agent saying, hey, these are actually fixtures. And she said, oh, you're right. I'll make sure to tell them. And it was my fault. I should have added that redundancy into the PA or into the personal property agreement saying that the TV mounts were going to stay, that the shelves were going to stay. And I didn't. And I'm assuming what happened is the listing agent did not go back to her sellers, even though I had mentioned it multiple times through the transaction to ensure that they were still there. And we showed up for a final walkthrough, and sellers have removed it and refused to put it back, by the way, too. So, like I said, that's my fault. Moving forward, I'm definitely going to be adding even things that I would consider fixtures, or 99% of people would consider fixtures. If my buyers want them to stay with the property, I'm going to be adding it to that personal property agreement. So I would recommend, it's something I'm going to be implementing moving forward as well. While you're at showings, if you know your buyers are thinking about, if you know that they're going to be submitting an offer on a property, take a little bit of time, go through the property and make sure you're not missing anything, whether it's an extra freezer, extra refrigerator in the garage, a wine fridge, like I said, any type of fixtures that might be up for interpretation. Exactly. Yep. Yep. Yeah.
And it's just a month that I'm like, I'll thought a couple nights well. Like, it's just like a result of a wall.
Yeah, so a fixture is anything designed for permanent attachment, right? And that's why, you know, a floating shelf that hangs on nails is not technically, I think the jury's out on that. What is, you know, is it a fixture? Was it meant to be hung permanently? Yes, but is it detachable? Yes, right? Whereas a TV mount, you're taking the whole thing down. It's meant to be hung permanently. Oftentimes it's screwed into the studs. Sometimes you have backing behind it as a reinforcement. And our purchase agreements actually state in line like 11 through 25 that TV mounts are included. But this is a topic that's being missed with a lot of sellers. And so I would encourage a few things. Number one, if we're working with sellers, set the tone up front when you're actually doing your listing appointments, letting them know TV mounts are considered a fixture. It's listed like that in the purchase agreement. They do need to stay. If your intention is to remove them from the property, we have to exclude that from the sale, and we want to make that publicly known. And then make sure that's written into the purchase agreement as well. So don't just assume that because something's listed in our PA now, that that's ever being communicated effectively to the other side. I guarantee you it's not for most agents, because we wouldn't be seeing it as common as we are if that expectation was being set. And then the same for our buyers. When we are walking through properties with them, if they're, like you had mentioned, if there's personal, what could be considered personal property, if you know that that is something your clients are going to request, document that either in photos as part of the listing. Make sure that you have it not only listed on the purchase agreement, but the personal property agreement as well. Just reiterating that it is a fixture and it is being included with the property. Is anybody else have you experienced that?
More question.
1 second.
Listing. People is pretty standard. That's what they say at the house. So I don't have a lot on the washer dryer.
That's a big money item.
Yeah. So we've been a listing agent, and sellers had to pay this one.
Yep.
So, and we even had it. We covered our assets, so we were happy, but realize they were
Great.
the other thing that comes up at hot tubs, actually about a few years ago, when I was purchasing a home, I was on we thought the hot tub was included, and we went to the
Yeah. Hot tub is technically considered personal property. Most people don't want to because cute and they're so heavy. Yeah. No?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Hardwired. They're not hardwired.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, while you had a question.
Actually, I wanted to add something. So when I was with Edina Realty, I remember our office manager had mentioned when you're touring a property and if your buyer is looking to put an offer into a property and they really like the appliances, make sure you know what type of appliances they are, the name of the brand, because one time it had happened where the seller decided to take all their brand new appliances and replace them with something that was, used, and it was too late. So if it's an LG appliance, if you're able to write the model number, something on the personal property, it's always not a bad idea.
I think that's actually great advice. I had a client do this and they ended up having to put their very expensive refrigerator back to get the sale moving forward, but they had no intention of, they were going to include a fridge, but they had no intention of including the appliance that was shown. And so I I go over this with my sellers when I'm doing my listing appointments now. Like if you're including these appliances, it's these appliances. If you have any intention of swapping anything out, that has to be disclosed.
It has to be done.
Yes.
We did the same thing on TV box, kind of to go back to that, like. Do it before you leave the house.
Yeah. Yeah, I write into all of my purchase agreements that it is the window treatments and curtain rods as seen on date of showing. And then you can print the listing paperwork out with you to include in your purchase agreement, or just have that saved to the file as a reference so that if they ever try to go back and switch it after the fact. Right. Just come into a new house with like sheets hanging out of all the windows.
Yeah. Same thing happened to me on Friday. Yeah, they said that their shelves had sentimental value. I was like,
Okay. So again, takeaway for the seller side, setting that expectation and that tone with your sellers when you're in your listing appointment. You know, if your curtains were sewn by grandma, great grandma back in like the late 1800s, we're excluding them from the sale. Take them down before we list your property. If what'd you say? Yeah. Right. Yes. Yeah, I do exactly the same thing. So just to clarify what Sarah was saying is something she does. I do this as well. It looks like several agents do that. When you're writing your personal property agreement, list in it as seen on, and then the date of your showing. Okay. Yeah.
Can I ask one more other question?
Me too. Okay.
Hold on 1 sec. So just to go over this point quick, Chelsea brought up Ring cameras. That is listed in our purchase agreement as being hardwired now, and it is a fixture and it should stay. So if you want to take it, it needs to be excluded from the sale. So discuss that up front with your sellers, and then also make sure that if you're representing a buyer, you are listing or itemizing that into the personal property agreement as well. Because once it's signed by the seller, they're now on the hook for leaving it.
A lot of our hardware, but it's tricky because you make sure that Simply Safe and the old one.
They're not. Simply Safe is not. Blair brought up the point that it's specific to the type or brand. This is why you want to initiate the conversation, because some are not hardwired. I have a Simply Safe system, and that's designed to just go wherever you move. But then certain styles are hardwired into the house, and that would be considered a fixture. Amy, did you say you had a question?
Yeah, I was just saying that I write it into the PA. Is it different if I write it? I know you were saying it's different if I write it on the personal property. So on the actual PA, I always write appliances as shown. I put the date, and I usually take photos unless the MLS listing shows them very clearly. Is that good enough, or do I need a personal property addendum?
I would do both, and you do need a personal property addendum as part of your contract for compliance sake. That actually goes to title, and title will write up a personal property agreement and everything that's being conveyed with the home. So if people didn't know that, your personal property agreement actually goes to title and becomes part of the record.
So every single time.
Every single time, cover your butt, cover your client's butt, right? So put it in your purchase agreement. I think it's line 25 of the PA, where it talks about what's included, and then also add that to your personal property sales agreement.
Okay.
Both spots. If you use the EXP personal property sales agreement, it will not automatically copy over from that line of your purchase agreement. But if you use the Minnesota Association of Realtors personal property agreement, it automatically copies over what you put into that line of the purchase agreement. just so you know how that works. Want to save yourself a step, just change up the document you're using, but either way, document it. Noelle, what was your question?
Okay, so sometimes the sellers, well, there's like a property that requires some TLC, and then the sellers list on the listing that, okay, the seller might take some of the personal property and whatever's left, the buyers are responsible for. So in this situation, let's say the buyer is touring a property and they like something, but we're not sure if the seller is going to take it or leave it behind. So I mean, you just add it also in your purchase agreement, say, you know, would like this or whatever, just like the same way.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, your purchase agreement and all subsequent addenda or amendments to it are your governing document. That's what holds up in a court of law. That is what determines what's handled one way or another. That's the legally binding contract. Anything that you want conveyed with the property or is excluded from the property, any terms related to the sale, all have to be documented in the governing document to be enforceable. Jennifer, am I correct in saying that as an attorney? I have an attorney shaking her head yes over here. So, okay. Verbiage that or terms you can put into your purchase agreement for accepting an offer that is contingent to the sale of buyer's property. Last year, I had a contract in place that was pending where my clients wrote it contingent. It was contingent to the sale of their property. They already had an offer on their property from Opendoor. It was a guaranteed sale. It was not going to fall apart. However, my clients decided to cancel that sale, which was a term written into their Opendoor offer. They had a right to cancel it. It was not a term written into ours, but they were able to exercise their right to cancel that deal, to sabotage their sale, get their earnest money back, and not have to move forward with their new purchase a week before closing. So if you are accepting offers for your sellers that are contingent to the sale of a buyer's property, I would strongly encourage you to put some additional verbiage into your purchase agreement that says that the seller or the buyer waives the right to cancel the purchase agreement of their existing home, or that earnest money will be forfeited in the event that the sale of the buyer's property does not close on time. There are contingencies in place saying that the sale cannot move forward, but there is nothing in there that says they can't forfeit the earnest money if they decide to cancel the sale themselves. So just make sure that you are protecting your seller in those situations. If you have questions about what that would look like, reach out to your sales coordinators. They are happy to jump in and kind of help doctor those deals for you. Any questions on that?
So add it to the counter.
Add it to the counter?
Add it to the counter when we're accepting.
That would be a counter offer term. Exactly. And right now, we just, like with fear and everything else happening in the market, you just don't know sometimes. So depending on whether you're working with your buyer, you're working with your seller, just kind of start thinking outside of the box of some of these issues that have come up and how we can proactively address them so that they don't become issues at the 11th hour when we're doing our final walkthrough on the property. That's when it becomes the biggest factor. Concessions are made, closings are canceled, or closings are delayed. Extended possession has to be agreed to so that the current owners have time to remove all their personal property. Or sometimes they're just, you have sellers. This happened to Tracy last month, a seller who said, I'm not closing on the property. I don't have any more money to deal with the personal property that's left behind, even though he agreed to it. He didn't care at that point if it canceled. And in order to save the deal, both listing agent and buyer's agent gave up thousands of dollars in commission to cover the cost of having a professional company come there and clean the personal property up around the land, because that's what it was going to take to make the buyer and seller move forward with the sale. And at the end of the day, those things should not be put on us, right, as agents. So we have to have an extra layer of protection in there sometimes for ourselves as an agent as well. Questions on that at all? Okay, start thinking outside the box about terms when it comes to inspection negotiation. A perfect example of that, okay? All picture holes or nail holes will be spackled and the house painted to match the existing color of the wall. You can state that as a term in your inspection agreement or upfront. I truthfully would probably leave that for inspection. You know, something they want to clear. You can add a term in with your inspection contingency that says, you know, all personal property will be removed, you know, prior to our final walkthrough. And I get specific with that. Make sure you state that it includes all food left in the refrigerator and freezer. Do you want the appliances cleaned? Is there an expectation with your client that the home either be professionally cleaned or that it be broom cleaned by the seller? Start thinking about some of those terms that you can write in that really aren't that big of a deal, because the seller is going to say, well, of course I'm going to leave the house clean if they're a good seller. But it also now puts them on the hook for having to fulfill that term. And it's just an easy way to add an extra layer of protection for your buyers. Didn't you have a bunch of personal property you had to take out too?
Yeah, this is the same deal. And once again, just don't leave anything up for interpretation.
Right.
We knew that they had a lot of personal property hung on the walls, a lot of picture frames, things like that. And they patched the holes, but did a shit job. The walls are a disaster. This is an $810,000 house. And I can show you pictures. I took 21 different pictures and videos to send to the listing agent. And now between both of us, we had to pay for a cleaning company. That came out of my pocket because everybody's version of clean is different. They assured me that the house was super clean, professionally clean in their opinion by them. There was personal property left in drawers and basement. Yeah, it was a disaster. And so $400 later, the house is clean, and then we're paying for a handyman to get in there, and painter to come back and take care of the walls on every level of the house.
So
Yeah.
Cleanliness stuff is such a
Yeah.
thing.
that's why I said got to be specific.
Yeah, cleanliness.
And painting those after you fix the walls could be a problem, because if the paint is old that's left behind, you're gonna have to
Might
paint
not match.
everything.
Yep.
Yep.
Get specific. Don't leave anything to interpretation, like you were saying. Did you have a comment, Blair?
Well, I was gonna say, yeah, that's not, but
Yeah.
I think even though you maybe would have looked better here. Or yes, whatever, but I think in those situations, I think even some, even if I don't think that it's not that they were,
Right.
Maybe it would have came up, you're by like, what the hell, but.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's two parts of it. Right, where I wonder, I'm like, oh, did the listing agent just not convey to the sellers what I wanted her to? And talking about the shelving that they had removed and the TV mouse that they had removed and the holes that they didn't patch very well. And if I would have written that in the purchase agreement, would it have been better? Like, I really don't know if they would have actually done it. But yeah, the other part of it too is I think they knew that given the position that we were in, just timing wise, we had a final walkthrough the morning of our closing. And yeah, I mean, they refused to put the shelves back on the walls. So it's a small enough item where it was like, they probably knew they could get away with it.
But I want to put this out there because you made a really great point, and I want to add to that. First of all, if it is documented in the purchase agreement in writing in the state of Minnesota, you are the broker's client. And if that term had been written into the purchase agreement and the sellers were not fulfilling that term, the listing agent is obligated, if you bring it to their attention, to find resolution to that, because it is a violation of the purchase agreement. And if the seller does not comply, the broker does have to get involved right away to inform them of what potentially could happen, because they are in violation of a written purchase agreement. And it could go as far as having to pursue damages against a broker. And my husband came up with this situation when it came to septic compliance on one of his properties that sold in August. And seller claimed they didn't have to do it. We went through they went through the process of, making sure it was compliant for everything. Well, they actually missed one of the requirements with their county, and it got billed back to the buyer after they closed. It got escalated up the chain, and the broker is the one who said, this has to be done. If you don't do it, we will initiate legal proceedings or whatever against you. And that's what it took. The broker that actually represented the client saying, you are required to do this. It is a term of your purchase agreement. If you don't do it, we will pursue damages from you so we can give damages to the other side. So the broker does have obligation in that regard. As far as your point, Blair, just writing it into the purchase agreement, you know, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that it's going to get done, but you have the ability to put a fine or something in there. So you could say seller agrees to have all personal property removed from the home and have all refrigerators, whatever, you know, food removed and the home broom cleaned or professionally cleaned, however you want to word that. And you could state that if that is not done by the time of final walkthrough, seller agrees to compensate buyer X amount of dollars to, you know, deal with the issue themselves in order to move closing forward. So there is some leverage you have there if you wanted to put like a dollar amount in your purchase agreement as a term.
If you're asking for it to be professionally clean, make sure you're asking for receipts.
Yes.
Professional service.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. We have clauses, obviously, that are available for the team to use. Don't be afraid to use those clauses. Create your own, which you have the ability to do in Transaction Desk if you don't like the wording of one of the ones that's already in there for you. Most of the clauses related to inspection clearly state that proof of repairs, invoices, and lien waivers will be provided to you within a certain number of days prior to closing. Usually do 7 days prior to closing, but I tweak that a little bit if, you know, it's a quick closing. Then maybe that looks more like 3 to 5 days. For sure, before final walkthrough, everything needs to be done. Because once you close on a property, the burden of proof now is on the buyer, and it becomes a lot harder to pursue those issues. And some agents or some buyers, they just don't want to do it, or they won't move forward with it. But there are others who are very serious about it, and they will. So, end of the day, we just want to give you guys some tactics that you can use to take better care of your clients, that protect you in the long run, protect your income. Because the last thing I want to see is agents conceding thousands of dollars or hundreds of dollars for professional cleanings and handyman to make their clients happy when they did their job correctly. Maybe just a little extra verbiage in a purchase agreement would have protected us in those situations, myself included. So that's it. Any follow-up questions at all? Situations that you're experiencing that could fall in line with this topic? Nail holes. That's becoming an issue. I've dealt with 5 issues over the summer. Agents on this team, you were number 5. It is, and they're ripping the walls out.
Yeah.
It's like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't need the little plastic piece in there. So it's like, you're not and you
Pull that out. Yeah. I think that the best thing we can do in that situation is proactively address that with any seller and say, this is something that started to come up now in closings, and I want to make sure I'm setting you up for a successful sale. You know, let's make sure that you're going to take down all photos and remove any wall anchors and have those walls patched ahead of time. You can put that in your listing agreement, because now your seller is agreeing between you and them that they're going to do that as part of the sale of their home. So if that's length you have to take it to, don't be afraid to do that. Anything else? Anything from any of you guys watching at home right now? Okay, again,
I think you guys answered.
Okay, awesome. Reach out to your sales coordinators if you have questions about how to word these things. Use it in your contracts, whether it's a listing agreement or a purchase agreement. Okay. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Elena. Thanks, Ian.
We're gonna thank you. We're gonna close it out, so we got a little break before team meeting. Okay.
And you can send us the recording.
Team meeting.
Can
Bye.
you send us the recording, please?
Can I what?
Send us the recording
The recording
of this.
of this training. So they go to the cloud, and then they are Hannah takes care of that, so she can post the recording for the team on Slack, or it gets uploaded to our YouTube channel, just so you know how that works.
All right,
Okay.
perfect. Thanks.
Okay, great. I'll see you guys later. Bye.
Bye.